Okay, hey folks, welcome. Thank you. We are only 15 minutes late, which is very good compared to our previous timings. So, anyway, so last week when we were talking about what to talk about in the meetup, there was only one talk that was there, and then I very over enthusiastically started. Okay, I'll talk about gems. Then I realized that I have content only for one page. Okay, like 6 or 7 points from the best practices. This thing. So I kind of said, okay, let's start talking about gems. Excuse me. Even for those who have never come to Ruby on Rails meetups or Ruby meetups, so then it will be useful for them also. So half of you maybe you might zone off. I'll wake you up towards the end when the interesting bits for you come. Okay. So anyway, I'm as you can see there, my name is Vijay. I work for ThoughtWorks, and so we are typically either we host the meetups here or in ThoughtWorks. Most of the times it's here, like in one of these two places. For those who are new, actually there's only 2 or 3 people who are new here, right? Hey, we sorry, we didn't do this thing intro part. Should we stop and do that?
He's saying there will be people coming, so we again have to do that.
Okay, fine, that's okay. So why is this? I don't know why it's not going to full screen. Okay. So what is a gem, right? So as I said, the first part of it is going to be very basic, especially for people who have never done gems, used gems or done Ruby. So what is a gem? Anybody? Yeah, it's a library. It's typically in this world we refer to Ruby libraries as gems, but there are other reusable code pieces in other tech stacks also. Just listed some of them here. So in the tech stack application tech stack world, we have jars, DLLs, NuGet packages, and hex packages in the Elixir world and stuff. In the OS world, we have apt, yum, all of those package managers. They have their corresponding packages, right? So they are also equivalently, they are also reusable pieces of code. You can plug and play in the sense that you download different pieces, they all conform to a specific API, and then they are all supposed to work together, right? That's how the tool, the authors have released them. Now, coming into the specifics of a gem itself, there are different pieces that are present, different files or different components present inside of a gem. In this case, I name my gem as just call it example. So what will be there is, there's an example in like if you think of it like a exploded zip file or gzip file, tar file or whatever, this is the structure that you will find. There will be a bin folder inside of which there might be an executable. If such an executable is there, then it will be loaded into your path when the gem is loaded, right? A very good example of this is, for example, RSpec. So most of the times, if you have not done bin stubs, then you will have the RSpec gem, RSpec executable from within the RSpec gems bin directory, right? Then the other one is the lib folder. This is typically where the other code that the author has written, that's where all the stuff lives in. One important point here is that your for auto discoverability, the gem's name and then the bin executable's name and the first file inside of the lib folder should typically all have the same name. So if I have a gem called example, the lib folder will have example.rb, and if I have a bin inside of bin folder, bin executable in the bin folder, it will be called example. Those are the naming conventions that are typically followed. Now inside of that example.rb, you might require require relative or do require of other files that you need. So if you have looked at the Rails stack, Rails itself is a collection of around 18 or 20 odd gems only. The most important of them, the most basics, are active support and rail ties. All the others, at I think after 3 point something, they became plug and play, in the sense that you can choose to not have most of them if you want. You might even not have an action controller. You might want to use your own MVC thing on top, you can do that also, right. So that's the first file inside of the lib folder will have that first, as in that's the entry point, right. So that file should have the same name as the gem, and from there you can require any of the other files that you want. Okay. Some gem authors also publish as part of their gem, they also publish the test folders, test or spec RSpec files. So you might find those also as a subfolder inside. When I usually do, I actually leave out the specs, because anyway the GitHub, the thing is itself open source, so they can go to the GitHub page and repository and find it anyway. But in the executable, I typically do not want any test related code in my runtime, production runtime, because this is going to be deployed there anyway, right. So I typically do not like to put tests there. Then of course there is the readme, which will contain your documentation. There might be a rake file, but another most important basic mandatory file is the gemspec file. Got it? Cool. Any questions till now?
By default, the distro is going to be included, right, in packaging?
Depends on which version of bundler or this thing you used. In the older versions, everything will be there. In the newer versions, you can. So I usually use that backtick and git ls files, and then grep out all the test folders. So I don't want to put those things there. But this is standard. If you're just doing a vanilla gem, if you're author of a vanilla gem, this is probably what will come out as default. Okay. As I said, there are three things. The lib in the Rails path. So the reason that it is green here, the to be part is green, is because if you are in a Rails application, this happens automatically for you. But if you are in any other web framework or plain old Ruby code and you are using gems, then you have to do this part. Like if you are managing the load path, you have to add it in there explicitly. The lib folder has to be added. Similarly, the bin folder has to be added to the path. So in the Rails world, I think, or maybe in the Ruby world, it's $$ and $question mark. There are some special symbols that are there, combinations. But these are more understandable by everybody. $load path, I think everybody knows that, right? And then $path, same thing. And of course the gem spec, which is the metadata of the gem. So we'll just go and look at. So you can also generate a gem spec by using the bundler gem, but I don't want to skip into that part. You can create an empty shell for a gem by using a command and then go and populate it yourself. But if you are writing it from scratch, this is kind of what you will end up with. Okay, you will have a file called abc.gemspec at the root of your repository, wherever you are going to run the commands from. And from that, inside of that, the content will be like this. The reason I have marked some of them with yellow is because these are mandatory fields. You cannot author or expose or publish a gem without these fields, right. So name, version, summary, authors and files, all of these are required. All the others are not really required, but they are also metadata. You can have publish a gem with those also, correct. Cool. Okay, so this is another interesting part which wasn't in the previous slide. When we are talking about gems, right, these are actually code that somebody has written and they are supposed to be reusable code, correct. But the best part about so how many of you have done .NET work and used NuGet packages? Or have you done Java work, Java coding with jars and stuff, Ant or Ivy or Maven? One person. Sorry, I don't know the Python equivalence, so I can't give equivalence there. But you would have come across situations where you are depending on some library, and for that to run at runtime, the class loader, for example, will try to find some other library itself, right? That is called what that's called is, it's called transitive dependencies. Okay, A depends on B, B depends on C, C depends on D, like that. and it need not be linear at all. A might also say I will depend on C itself, right, directly. So you will come to an interesting this thing there related to versioning. But what you can see, one of the aspects of dependency management is how do you separate out your runtime dependencies versus your test time or development dependencies, right. So in the gem spec you have these two methods, configuration methods also that you can call. If you notice, the previous ones were all had equal to's. So they are method assignment method calls or attr accessor calls or something, but you set those as values with equal to's, and in this you are actually calling a method, right. That is the main difference. You don't put an equal to in these two. Okay. The runtime dependency is what you can work with at runtime, what you need, what this gem needs at runtime for it to be working, for it to work for all the features that it's exporting, right. The development dependencies are if somebody is going to fork your code base or somehow contribute to that, then they need these other things. So in this case, runtime dependency is JSON, and again this is just an example, and in my development dependency I have just said pry. So you might notice the syntax here to the right after the comma. That is, how many of you have heard of SEMVer, semantic versioning? Good job. Okay, so then can one of you describe what that means? Not you both, and not Steve. Anybody else?
It means like it needs version from 2.2 to less than 3. 2.2
Yep.
is a minor version there, and the first 2 is a major version.
Yep.
So major dot minor version to 3.0.
Yep. Perfect. So this is the old style of writing it, where you have the greater than equal to, and if you notice it's inside of an array, and you can also specify an upper bound. You can specify a lower bound and an upper bound, and in both of them you can do inclusive or exclusive. So when you have the equal to sign, it's inclusive. When you have without the equal to sign, it's exclusive, right. So greater than or equal to 2.2.0, but definitely lesser than 3.0. So 2.9999 whatever is still okay, but not 3.0. And it's numerically it will compare. So you can't say okay, it's not 3, let's go to 4.0 and it won't work. Less than has a meaning also. It does numerical comparison also. Okay, so and of course this whole thing is optional, so you need not give any version, but again in my as you will see in my thing, my preference, my opinion is that that's actually bad, and I'll describe that a little bit more in detail later. So I always propagate, or I'm a proponent of always specifying a version. I'll tell you the reason why also.
One thing here, Ruby, we don't have a concept like compile time and runtime.
Yep.
So it's always like interpret.
Well, not really, right? It depends on what you have in your load path for that environment. So you do have something like a runtime versus something like a development time. Runtime in the sense that it's more in the context of environments.
Okay, so that library or that dependency will be loaded into that IRB or something.
Yep. Yep. Cool. Now this, I don't know, I just saw this word. Okay. So I just came across this word like twiddle waka. It seems very childish, I should say, but I came across that word like only 2 days ago when I started writing this whole post. I'd used that the tilde greater than like for the past like 10 years or so, but came across that only now. Another example of the SEMVer is OSGI specs. If you have you used Eclipse? Anybody used Eclipse? Okay, OSGI class loading. Okay, so this the reason I put this is that this one is actually exactly semantically equivalent to this, right? what it means, excuse me, as Prasanna was saying, the tilde greater than means whatever these individual numbers are called segments, right. So, you have 2 segments here, whereas here you have 3 segments. So, when you use the tilde greater than, it means that lock the n minus 1 segments, and the nth segment you can keep upgrading as much as you want. It will never go down. So, it is equivalent to greater than or equal to 2.2 at a minimum, but it can go up, but it can never go up to beyond 2 like 3 dot something, it can never go. 2.9999 n number of 9s you can go. That is what that means, tilde greater than. And came across this as being called twiddlewaka. The reason for this is that in many cases, especially when you start a project, start coding on an application, you might start off with whatever is the latest at that point of time, which works in your context, right. You might have 20 or 30 or 40 different gems. You might start working with whatever works at that point of time. But let us say you are developing for like 6 months. In that time frame, the author might be releasing on their own timeline, they will release the gems, whatever they are developing, correct. So, you do not want to keep upgrading manually or even automatically. Well, automatic is a caveated word there. You definitely do not want to do a manual upgrade every time. So, you say that I am okay with in this case any point versions, if it gets upgraded I will automatically take that. Of course, my CI will catch any breakages. That is the confidence that you will have, right. So, this is why the tilde greater than is used. We will jump a little bit into what the gem ecosystem gives you from the command line. Okay. So, what we saw was the gem spec, which as the author of a gem you might start doing that, and then we also looked at the directory structure, and you can create your own gems and all that, right. But at some point you are going to publish it. So, for gem authors the command is gem publish, or you can also use bundler to go and publish stuff. It will automatically do it into Ruby gems, right. Now, in the Ruby gems, which is pre-bundler, the core Ruby gems, there are other commands which a user of the gem will be using, right. Let us say Vaisak published a gem, and I don't know only a part of the name. I know that it has VY in the name, right. So, star VY star, for example, I can go and do a gem list. What that will do is it will list all the gems that I have in my local cache with that regular expression pattern. But most likely it is not like you already have it installed, you will most likely be searching for some gem with some name, right. So, that is where the second command comes in, gem search. Of course, in today's world, if you are doing it, you probably are opening a browser, going to rubygems.org and searching for it there. But under the hood, this is exactly what it is doing, right. It is doing it from, it is equivalent to you doing it yourself from the command line. You can also do gem info and all of those stuff to get more information about a particular gem. And after searching, you will most likely go to install it, which is gem install. Here you need to give the complete correct name. Whether it has underscores, you need to give underscores. If it has hyphen, mostly people do not use hyphen in the Ruby world, but still I think the original version of SAS Rails had SAS hyphen Rails. Now only I think it is changed, I am not sure. So, those kind of things you will have to, so the third and fourth command you will have to be the pure full complete correct name. There is also another extension to this where you can say @ and then specify the version number that you want. Let us say you want a specific version which is not the latest version, you can go and use that also to go and install it. Of course, gem uninstall, if you have more than one version of the same gem installed, the gem uninstall command will prompt you as to which version you want to uninstall or even uninstall all. And if it finds a dependency that some other gem is requiring this, then it will prompt you for that also. So, that is one of the things that when I talked about that is what is the most important part, right. You as a user should not need to manually go and find what version of what other libraries that you need to get to work. and or when you're trying to uninstall it, the tool or the system needs to tell you, hold on, you're trying to uninstall something but something else is using it. So these are very important concepts, which for example in the Java world, only after Maven came, when Ivy also tried to catch up to what Maven was doing, that's when they started doing these kind of things. Otherwise it was manual process, it was the developers headache or responsibility, however you want to look at it, to go and get all those, put them in the class path, do everything that's required. Now we talked about bundler, so I'll just digress a little bit into that, because this is, nowadays when you talk about gems, you almost never talk about it outside of context of bundler. Ruby gems is just is almost like plumbing glue code. Bundler itself is a gem. It uses the Ruby gems ecosystem and the commands internally, but most of us never even bother about it. Even I don't bother about it most of the time, right? We always do bundle install or something else with bundler. That's our decorator pattern on top in effect. So bundler is a gem by itself, of course. So if you go and search in Ruby gems, you will find bundler. You can go to its homepage. You can go and see change logs, commits, everything that you can see in any open source GitHub repository. What it also does is this set of things. I'm sure most of you have started reading, and or if you already know, then that's even better. The main part is, and the second, of course, the first part I keep reiterating that it looks at the prerequisites and builds a dependency tree, finds if there are conflicts, and will warn you, or actually it won't even warn you, it will stop execution, saying that there are conflicting versions either requested or already loaded, right? And you have to give some other extra commands to say, okay, forget about it, go past, force it to go past. But that's not the typical style anyway. If you have a conflict, you have to go and resolve it and see why it's doing that. Of course, and then the third is also, all of these are equally important. The third is also where it is within the specified boundaries. Let's say I might have a Rails application and I'm depending on, what's a good example?
Java.
Sorry?
Java.
No, Rails example, right? Rails application. Okay, Bootstrap. So I am actually depending on Bootstrap Rails gem, which in turn calls Bootstrap. But because of some other legacy context, I have also included Bootstrap, but a previous version. Bootstrap, instead of Bootstrap 3, I have done Bootstrap 2 in my Gemfile. But as soon as I try to introduce or upgrade Bootstrap Rails, it will go and complain saying that there are conflicting versions of Bootstrap trying to be loaded. So it will tell me and warn me and fail, right? So I have to go and fix that, the conflicting these things. So within the specified boundaries, you can also specify, as I said before, similar to the gem spec. Okay, I'm kind of going forward in the Gemfile now, I have not yet introduced that. But anyway, within the specified boundaries, it will go and resolve all things and try to give you the most adapted working version. Yeah. Another important thing is it uses a file called Gemfile and gemfile.lock to do all of this stuff. And we'll come to that also a little bit later. And finally, one of the other things that I do, again from my best practice, is that I go and run a command which will tell me what are all the outdated gems, and it will go and I'll do that on a weekly basis kind of. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just go and look at this.
What are the comments like you previously one of the session told about git tool? So this is another cleanup.
Okay.
So you have
Yeah.
series of things.
Yeah. I have. Okay, I'll show you that one. Well, yeah. So what I do is a little bit anal. Sorry. Okay, there it is. So I go to F11. Okay, anyway, you can see this, right? Let's do the raw part, maybe that's cleaner. Okay. So one of the things I do is I use, okay, to answer your question and answer your question, whenever I start a Rails project, right, it will obviously when I do Rails new, it will go and give a list of stuff. On top of that, I'll go and do a few things. One is definitely I'll set up a Ruby version here itself, because most of us are used to using RVM or RBNV or CHRuby. But in many cases, from a sysadmin perspective, they will not install that on your production machine. In which case, there is actually a disconnect between the Ruby version you're running versus what this was written for in development mode. Okay. Because of that, I as a developer want to be, I'm kind of like a very hard and fast thingy here. I want to ensure that the Ruby that I used while developing is at a minimum, it's the lowest version that this will work with on production also. So the only place that I know of is to put this line in the gem file itself. So when the bundler loads the gems in production environment, it will verify that Ruby version is this. Same semantic versioning can be done, tilde greater than and all of that. I usually do nothing so that it's equal to 230. Okay.
There's some downside to doing this, because I see so many documentations of open source. They don't do this. They just say that the minimum version required is 2.0 and
right.
So I don't see this happening in a lot of places.
Right.
So I was just wondering what is going on.
The reason is that so if I was a tool author, I would say minimum version and maximum version.
Right.
I will not mandate you are equal to a particular version, because you want the widest possible usage. But as a user of the tool itself or of the library, I want to make sure my application is working. That's my main concern. For the tool author's perspective, it is the inverse of that, right? Of course, the application should work, but I am providing a generic library. So as wide a coverage is what they are looking for.
They want it to work for multiple
Yes, yes. I want to make sure that I am developing 2.3. But in production, if the ops person, so I was in a previous client where we were developing a Rails application and all that. So we gave them the specs as what we need, right? The guy, he was probably new, I don't know, but he didn't know, he was doing, I think that at that time it was Ubuntu 12.04 or something like that, which had an older version of Ruby. And he kept saying the app is not starting. Because I'm using 1.9 hash syntax and stuff like that in mine, and he was on 12.04, like 3 years old LTS version of a server OS, right, which did not have the newer version of Ruby. So I want to make sure that is not happening. So that second line I will always put in mind. Rails will not generate it, but this is what I do. Okay, if you notice. In my, this is kind of the reason I put this here is this is the reference Gemfile for almost all of my Rails code bases. It's a superset of all the gems that I've used, and you'll see down below some of them. But the main thing you'll notice in all of these is the font too small. Is it better now? Sorry. So if you notice in all of these, they will have a version. You can specify it without a version, but I will make sure that all of my code bases or anything that I am contributing to, they will be locked to specific versions. The reason for this is very simple. I have been on 3 different occasions, I have inherited code which was written 2 years ago and active development stopped like 8 months ago, and they were on an older version of Rails. And when I did a git clone, I tried to even start anything like do migrations, nothing will work, because in my system or in that 8-month period, some major version upgrade of some of these has happened. So it doesn't complain because nothing was locked, but it doesn't work. Then I have to go and manually go and try and find out, okay, jQuery. So this is an example, right? When this was written, jQuery Rails was 4 point something, but then when I inherited 5 point something was there, and I do a lot of different projects in Rails, right? So in my laptop I'll have many versions of Ruby, many versions of these gems and everything. So it didn't work at all. So I had to go and manually find out which version will work, and it's easy to do with one. If you have 20, 40, it's very hard. You will spend like days trying to just get the app running.
So it doesn't say any error. So how do you figure out?
Nothing will start. If you try to do even rake -t or rake routes, everything will fall flat, right? So my request to anybody, think of the person who's going to inherit your code. Don't think of only you writing that code.
But you will get the log file, right?
What log file?
Gem log.
Yeah, so in this case I had to also do a Ruby upgrade at the same time. So when you're doing Ruby upgrade, your gemfile.lock doesn't matter. You will be discarding gemfile.lock and recreating from scratch, right? So main thing is think of the person behind you. In that context, because in production you want to work, you know you have worked or tested in this combination of different gems. So you are only adhering or ensuring that it's working there. The guy next is he or she should not have a problem, right? So this is one of the things that, you know, as in that best practices style, I always lock. Most of the time I will also lock it to the third level, major, minor, tiny, but some cases I lock on the major, minor alone, okay, but most of them you will find it's always major, minor, tiny. Then this gist I actually put it public because, you know, many of my colleagues also, they typically go and look at many of the gems, and we kind of use these for example, you might go and do Rails best practices, excuse me, you might do JSLint or ESLint or something like that, you might do metric foo. All of these are pretty standard gems for any Rails or Ruby application, right? You want to incorporate these to make sure your quality metrics are all adhered to as a team. So in that context, that's why I started building up a superset of all the gems that I typically use. Of course, I will comment out stuff if I am not using device, if I am not using Kaminari, I will just comment it out. But this is the latest version. For example, high voltage, I was using it where it was used for instead of having a controller and all, just have a static ERB file. It's not static per se, but that can serve out, act as a dynamic controller and just serve it out. I think you also used it before, one of the other meetups.
Now helper, right? So it does serve the same purpose?
Yeah, but this, it comes as a gem, you don't need to worry about what it is. All it is you are exposing it as a file in some sites folder or something like that, right? Just plop it in there and it will work. And you get the power of the ERB and Rails ecosystem, whatever. If you want to put some, say, some common header, those kind of things you can put in there. So this is thing, and this is the other list. So I use Brakeman, Flame Graph, Rack Mini Profiler, all of these almost standard stuff I'll use in most of my projects. Unfortunately, what it will mean is if I start a Rails project from scratch, Rails will put like 20 gems, I'll add another 30 more, and we'll end up with 50-60 gems right from the get go. Okay, that's one downside of this.
It's a lot of dependencies.
Yes, but sorry, yeah, a lot of gems. The second thing though is, if you notice, and this again goes back to one of the best practices, Rails also by default does not, it only groups some of the gems, okay, like you notice this group development, right?
Yeah.
Or comma group colon development, that style is also there. That grouping is there only for some of the gems, and most of the gems you might find on the Ruby Gems website, the author does not specify which environment it's for. Classic example, RSpec will not specify that you should or should not put it in development environment. It will just be default. The problem with that is then that gets installed in your production environment. So you should never do that. There's one caveat with RSpec, another with uglifier, and I think JS minifier or something, one of those also. So these three are my special kind of thing, where I think even last time Elixir talk also we were talking, right? I want to use these not even at development time, but only at some package time. So in my mind, I have 4 groupings. One is development, one is test, another is package, and fourth is runtime, like production runtime or something. So that part of it is what we don't get here. But you used to have something called the asset groups, but now it's not there. I love that thing. They don't do that anymore, but that is what is useful for. Or even now there is something called docs. So when Rails generates it, there's a group called docs. I usually chuck it out in the first place, but that is an example where you don't need it for development at all. You don't need it for test also. You don't need it while running your program, but you need it only when you're running your document generation step, right? That's an example of that. Okay. One more thing, make sure, okay, can anybody tell me why this is there, this part? No, I said no, not you two. Okay, so how many of you have looked at memory consumption at startup of your Rails application? Actually a very interesting 2-hour workshop in RubyConf 2014, I think. So where I was introduced to a tool called Valgrind. So what that does is it's a memory profiler, and it will go and look at how much memory is consumed both at startup time and at runtime, and kind of a linear, if you say, if you will, a linear equivalent of your startup time is startup memory is also how much time it takes to start up. Cold start, warm start, you know of those two terms, right, in applications. So cold start is when your application, there's nothing in memory at all and your VM is starting up from scratch to load your application. Warm start is when you have a process that was previously killed or stopped, you know, with the SIGINT, SIGTERM, whatever, but the RAM, a portion of the RAM still holds that. If you have used Spring, it's the same concept. In your Rails application, if you have used Spring, it's the same concept. Even though you think your application is stopped, in memory, in your computer's memory, some portion of it is still alive. And so if you restart your process immediately afterwards, within, like, you know, some time span, that memory is reused. So that's called a warm start. Now coming back to this, what happens is that there are many gems which, you know, again from the gem authors or from the default generator and all, you get a lot of these, right? But most cases you don't really need them at the application start. Okay. For example, okay, even Faker, this is a good example. So if you've used Faker or F-Faker, I think Abhishek, you're a proponent of F-Faker, right? You said you don't like Faker or something. Oh, you like Faker, okay. Anyway, so a Faker, who's used Faker before? Or who has not used Faker? That might be smaller, okay. So Faker is a gem that you use for faking data. It's like the creating lorem ipsum data, you know, with some API.